Hey guys, so I just spent the last month mostly practicing 3x3 blindfolded. It was never one of my main events, but I practiced it here and there, and I finally got kind of good at it. So I'll share with you guys what I've learned over this past month. But first I want to talk about how the competition went. UBC Open 2020 was a 2-day competition, and I actually did really well on the second day, which is when all the blindfolded stuff happened, which was just 3x3 blindfolded and multi-blind. I first did multi-blind and got 8 out of 8, which really surprised me because there was one point where I wasn't sure if I did an alg or not. Next was blindfolded, and I was really just aiming to beat 126, which was my best single, but I somehow got a 55 on a lucky scramble. That was really surprising because my best ever is 50, and 55 is probably my third or fourth best time ever. Then in finals, I managed to pull out a 58, which was especially lucky because not only was it a good scramble, but here you can see that I realized my memorization was wrong, and I had to guess what the next piece was, and I just happened to guess it correctly. It was a split-second decision, and I could kind of guess which piece I hadn't gone to yet for edges, but it could have been either sticker on that piece, so it was a 50-50 and I got it right. So there were 3 people better than me at the competition, and they all kind of messed up, so this 58 actually got me first place. But then back to multi-blind, I ended up getting 9 out of 9 in 46 minutes. You have an hour to do this, and based on previous attempts, I thought I would take an hour, but as you can see, I'm improving throughout the day, and that kind of goes to show how much knowing your letter pairs will do for you. Because before, I used to get so tired after just one attempt of multi-blind with 6 cubes, and now I did 8, 10, and 9, and I still managed to improve throughout the day without feeling like I was about to die. Oh, and also I was focusing on the fundamentals, so memorization and executing quickly. I didn't focus on learning a new method or new algs. I still use M2 for edges and Old Pockman for corners, which are in the description. So now what I learned this month, the first thing is I made a list of my letter pairs. So if you're watching this and you don't do blindfolded, what I mean by letter pairs is you would see like this one, and then this would be the letter U, and this would be V, and you'd put that together to get ultraviolet. And this is how you memorize which pieces to solve. But it's not always so obvious like UV. If you get something like XC, you don't know what to do with it. So instead I made a spreadsheet with all of the letter pairs, and this looks like it would be a lot of work, but it really isn't because a lot of them are really obvious. AC is air conditioning, BD is bed. This is really just to make sure you're consistent with what you pick, and if you ever forget a hard one, you can come check. So after trying to fill it in, what I realized was that X would be too hard, and I switched out X for SH. Turns out SH is one of the easiest things you can make pairs with. For example, XC was hard, but for me, SHC is Shuckle, the Pokemon. XQ was hard, but SHQ is Shack. Next, if you're only worrying about 3 blind, you actually only have to use letter pairs for things that are not your buffer, which means you don't have to know a single letter pair using any of these, and you can gray out those rows and columns. So this exact template, I'll link it in the description, and you can make a copy of it for yourself. And this is just for 3x3 blind. If you do multi-blind, 4 blind, or 5 blind, you will have to know those letter pairs as well, but this is just a starting point I worked on. The next one is make sure you memorize this certain way. Corners first with images, then edges with audio, then solve edges, then solve corners. You memorize corners first so that you know if you have parity faster, and you can also hold images for a longer period of time in your memory. And audio memorization is faster, but you don't get to hold it in your memory for as long, which is why you solve edges right away afterwards. So now I'll walk through a bit of memorization so you know what I mean, and also I'll have some other tips here as well. So my buffer is this. Sorry if that's not your buffer. I teach the buffer here. A lot of people have the buffer here, but I'm lefty. So this goes to here, which is W, and then U. So that's my friend whose last name is Wu. Then V, then this is the buffer, so I'll just pick anything else that's easy. I can pick I, so that's Vihart. Then C, R is Crystal, and then I, and that's it. And then I have a flipped piece here. So from the letter pairs, it's just my friend and Vihart find a crystal. Pretty easy. But for single letters, what I've learned is to double up that letter and make something out of that. I for me is 2, and what I do is I just take the last thing I memorized and just make 2 of it. Next, for twisted corners, if there are multiple corners twisted, I just look at them and try to remember what it looks like. But if there's only one corner twisted, then when I say, oh, I'll remember that, I don't remember it. So what I do instead is I remember where the white or yellow on it is, and in this case, it's at the back. So I'll take this whole thing and just picture it happening from the back. Next, for edges, this is my buffer, so this goes to V, goes to W, and this is just vowel. I put any vowel in between, and I'll know that I have V and W, and I ignore the vowel. Next is H, and then this is the buffer, so I can go to A next. HA will be hey. And then next is J, and this one is X or SH, so this will be Josh. And I can throw random vowels in there because if it ends in a vowel like hey, then I know I have to do HA. But if it doesn't end in a vowel like Josh, I know I can ignore the vowel and just do JSH. And then I would just go through the rest of the memorization that way. So for edge memorization, there are two things I really improved on, and the first is being able to see something and immediately know what letter that is. So I could see this and immediately know it's V, I can see this, immediately know it's W, and so on. That just comes from pure practice. The next is something I've deliberately been trying to do, and that's when I pronounce everything, I try not to review it. Because it's inherently hard to keep audio in memorization. If you can do the first step of creating these fast enough, then you won't even have to review it, and that's ideal. So sometimes when I go through quickly and don't have to review, then I can get edge memorization in like under 10 seconds. But when I'm sloppy, it takes like over 15 seconds, and that's probably the biggest difference in my times for blindfolded. So it's something I'm still trying to work on. Next, just 2 execution tips. For edges, instead of doing M2 with ring finger then middle finger, this requires a regrip of your index finger to here instead of where your fingers normally are. So instead, a really good M2 is when you do R prime and then do M prime and wide R at the same time. So wide R and M prime, and that does M2, but at the same time. So it's basically move down, put ring finger here, and then move your ring finger all the way up over to here. This is good in a lot of cases because you don't have to regrip. So something like the letter B, versus with the double flick method, you'd have to regrip to do that. So that's something that made my edges a lot smoother. Now for corners, if you're using Old Pachman, make sure you cancel setup moves as often as you can. So for example, if your target is here and your letter is J, then the setup move is R prime to get it here. Then when you do the swapping algorithm, you start with R, and that just cancels. So instead for J, I would just do it like this. And then on the last move, just do R2. Another example is T, the setup move is R, but I'm gonna have to do it R right afterwards, so I can just start with R2, and then at the very end, I don't have to do the last move because it'll cancel. Then another example is setup moves for multiple pieces, so if I have C and then D, then for C I do F2, D to get it over here, and then for D, which was here, the setup move is F2, but I've already done an F2 at this point, so instead of doing F2 and then F2 again, I can just not do that move and just do the swapping from here. And then that does C and D. Next, some tips for multi-blind. I'm not an expert, but here's just what I've been doing. If you're doing any reasonable amount of cubes, more than just like 2, then make sure you set them up in a particular way. So you can segment them like this, and when you take out a cube to solve it, make sure you put it back at the same spot once you're done. Now, another good reason why you set it up like this is because you would memorize using rooms. And what I mean by this is, so for 1 cube, I'd memorize all of the edges and have that as letter pairs, and then memorize all of the corners and also have that as letter pairs. So just keep in mind, this is a different order than I do for 3 blind. And I'm not using audio because I have to hold this in my memory for a long time. Next, how to use rooms. This is really easy. You don't need to practice it. You just need to come up with a list of rooms. So the story or scene that I come up with for the first cube, I have that all happening in my bedroom. And I always remember that my bedroom is the first cube. So when I come back to it, I'll never have to think, what was this? I just think my bedroom and I'll immediately remember what was in there. This makes memory so much easier. It takes no practice and it's like hacking your brain. First time I tried 6 cubes blindfolded, I was really surprised at how easy it was. And then this would be my living room. This would be another bedroom in my house. And then you could keep going through your house, or you could move on to like classrooms in your school, places you've been to, and so on. Next, for flipped pieces, you can no longer just look at them and remember it because there's too many cubes you'll have to remember. So what I do instead is I just remember where the white or yellow is. So this is the letter F, this is the letter M. So F, M. For me, the memorization is Full Metal Alchemist, so I'll remember that guy, but twisting. This is a little weird to memorize, and I don't know if that's what people who are good at multi-blind actually do, but if you're just going to attempt any non-huge amount of cubes like I did 9, then it works just fine because you have plenty of time. And lastly, how I've been practicing is I use the blindfolded scrambles on CS Timer where they have wide moves at the end to change the orientation. And then once it's scrambled and in the random orientation, sometimes from the scramble you can tell how it's oriented. Like if the last move was a U wide, you know white is going to be on top. So what I do after the wide moves are applied is I throw it up into the air, and whatever I get, I don't look at it and put it under a cube cover. So this simulates what happens in competition. What you do is you put your hands on the timer and then you take the cover off yourself, which is different from normal solves. Then you quickly have to find white, green, or whatever your orientation is, and you can begin memorizing. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.